The plains of hell are a horrific place due to the Dark Lord's betrayal by the Makers resulting in his unsealment, which probably is a word, but I don't make the rules, I just work here. His creations would ultimately be corrupted as well as the very land. In truth, the Makers had sealed Davoth away in order to protect their own fragile existence, ultimately resulting in their own downfall. As an untold amount of time would pass, Davoth, or the Dark Lord as he was known because edgelord, would become more and more angry over his betrayal, and with time, his hatred did not fade at all. Being the very creator of life and ironically the father once upon a time for the Makers, his influence would reverberate within the world that would continue to alter and change everything around him. Through his hatred and being mildly upsetty spaghetti, the life in the immediate area would begin to eventually change into what would become the demonic visages and hatred in physical form. As Davoth would wail against his prison walls that the Makers had installed around his realm, unfortunately for them and any life that came after, cracks would begin to form. Small leaks would allow for individuals to even go as far as to access hell, and eventually it would come down to quite literally having to remove Davoth's life sphere from his body in order to truly subdue the threat that was posed to all of creation. One Maker would actually get lucky enough to pull it off in battle and absorb the essence of Davoth to a degree where he would become the aforementioned father. However, time would progress as time tends to do, and for that time though, the Makers would be considered immortal. As they enjoyed this immortality, they would then spread out amongst the stars, contacting other people and worlds, and request just one thing out of them: worship them in exchange for their technology and access to the stars themselves. And this arrangement would work for a time, but an issue would present itself. As the father was aging, typically immortality was achieved through the process of rebirthing yourself through using the father's power. However, the father would disappear, which would lead to a great panic amongst the Makers. While they could live for thousands of years is an infinitely smaller lifespan compared to eternal life. As a result of this and the absence of the father, the Khan Maker in power at that point in time could not pass on, and another would not be born. So to this end, she would attempt to save her people by any means necessary. Eventually, because of this desperation, she would begin listening to the whispers in her mind, not realizing that they were coming from the Dark Lord himself. She would open portals into hell where factories would be set up in order to harvest Argent energy. This energy source would allegedly keep them immortal, but it came at a high price. She would have to send souls there to be tortured in order to get the hell energy that she craved for her people. But first, this episode is sponsored by Raycon. Are you ready to have premium earbuds at half the cost of other brands? If so, then by going to buyraycon.com/Roanoke, you can get 15% off site-wide. That's right. Just in time for Father's Day, you'll get 15% off site-wide. Go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke. With Father's Day on the horizon, don't you want to prevent your father's own spiral into madness by giving him a chance at listening to the bliss of dad podcasts, whether he's lifting at the gym, maybe on some work phone calls, riding a mower for the 4th time that day, which is the perfect time to use the active noise canceling feature, or possibly even volunteering you for 18 hours of unpaid work at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Of course you would. And with Raycon's 40-hour battery life and comfortable ergonomic design, you will be happily wearing them all day long. And speaking of battery, the quick charge function means that just 15 minutes of charging gives you 2 hours of battery. I personally like my Raycons at the gym because, let's be honest, they are fantastic at noise blocking, and with Doom the Dark Ages having just come out, you know I've been mainlining the soundtrack during my lifts. And if you don't like Raycons, or your dad doesn't, Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee return policy, no questions asked. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke to get 15% off site-wide. That is right. Just in time for Father's Day, you'll get 15% off. You go to buyraycon.com/Roanoke. All right, let's get back to it. As a result of this connection, the sealing off of this realm was broken and its influence would be allowed to spread once more. And eventually humanity would find it, which we were so sure would be a fantastic idea, not really grasping where it was even coming from in the first place. You know, I'm starting to get the feeling that the idea of no free lunch is real because in our media, we always find some form of energy that appears great at first, but in reality, we become the lunch one way or another. Looking at you, Dead Space. Anyhow, after humanity would find this hell energy and attempt to utilize it, the Doom Marine, or Doom Guy, would be experiencing his own set of events that would lead him to be stationed on Mars, where ultimately he is then dropped off in hell, where he would fight the demons for a time, as a human, eventually making it to Argentinur, which leads us up really close to the events of Doom the Dark Ages. As it became clear slowly, the Makers were actually a bunch of huge selfish dorks, hell-bent on their own survival due to their own egos. Classic aliens, am I right? But eventually, despite having a, actual alliance with humans of Argentinur just completely ignored, which these guys are known as the Night Sentinels, portals would open up on the planet, leading to the death and destruction of the people there. In some ways, they were quite successful in fighting back, as the Doom guy would be upgraded by the Seraphim into the Doomslayer, essentially turning himself into a god. And as we all know, he would eventually go on to destroy the Dark Lord, but in this instance, he was dealing with a flat-out invasion of Argentinur and standing and fighting across the entire planet and into Hell several times. Given that this was a different time, however, Hell itself is also at a different point. Greg, throw up the meme of Hell before and after the Doomslayer. Everyone talks about the apocalypse led to the complete devastation of Argentinur, but in reality, Hell was having an equal apocalypse, it seems. And given the nature of the Doomslayer and the Dark Lord being the same thing, just on different sides, it's pretty clear Hell literally was getting its tail kicked while also attempting to take over the other realms. You love to see it. But this brings us up to the current point in time, which if you have played Doom the Dark Ages, you'll see many different phenotypic traits, which I believe will actually show the theory of imp progression is correct all the way to the Archvile. These differences in this point in time present themselves amongst these demons who are still within the planes of Hell, and interestingly, it shows us several things about the hierarchies that exist also, as well as the progression into the later games, culminating into the last remaining forms seen within Doom Eternal. So as we make our way through the fighting on Argentinur, some imps can be seen sporting hair on their bodies. Also, strangely enough, the Cacao demons appear mostly absent in their meatball forms, and the Pinkies are clearly animals with 4 proportional limbs within this time frame. In the later games, demons have no weapons and do not really appear to wield any sort of countermeasure. So I'm going to suggest something before we move on to today's topic. The demons in Doom the Dark Ages got so thoroughly stomped out that it set them back to an era where most of their technology was lost to them, and it left them little more than feral beasts being controlled. We didn't know it at the time, but functionally, as the Doomslayer, we were running around taking out the last lines of resistance, which were underdeveloped and overbred, until ultimately attacking the last bastion of Hell's power, Imora. But within the Dark Ages, as the aforementioned hierarchies and technologies mean that over time, evolutionary traits would develop, allowing for several differentiations amongst the species that were exposed to Davos' anger long term. So I think how we should do this is establish what the hierarchy appears to be and how there is a progression, and then move on to the physiology of the demon that we are discussing today, which of course is the Imp Stalker.
God damn.
First things first on the realist. Second thing, the Imps, while a lowly foot soldier on the battlefield, appear to be one of the most versatile in terms of genetic tampering, allowing them to become what they are. Given that they had hair and were in the, they're in the Dark Ages, we need to understand that this could very well be the influence of the Hell energy over time, which again is just Davos hatred basically. Establishing the progression pattern, the guys that are walking around fully bipedal, the unwilling, they have their faces covered up by these bony protrusions. These appear to be the original inhabitants of the Hell plane. Back when it wasn't the Hell plane though. Given Davos' propensity to make intelligent creatures, quite literally making the Makers in order to figure out how to make his older creations immortal like himself, I would have to go on a limb and say that these were just regular people at some point in time. We see the same thing taking place with humans in the older games, who are now reduced to fodder given that humans are not very large. These creatures, with their stumbling, ungainly walking and attack patterns, means that at one point or another they were very likely sapient beings, just consistently exposed to Hell energy. As this corrupted their form, this in turn would lead them to devolve over time. We can assume that if this is the correct line of progression, then these bipedal people were likely somewhat mammalian. Now here's where things get a bit strange depending on how you follow it. Davoth was not technically the father, yet his essence was imbued in a maker who took his life sphere. So while the father did in fact create the earthly realms, he was only able to do so through Davoth's influence. So we need to ask, how much of that influence is present and to what capacity? Given that Argentinur was for all intents and purposes, just humans, which they are referred to as such, and given that humanity also exists on Earth, we can assume when the body plan for humanity appears present largely because of his influence, this makes the most amount of sense. And with this then, we can also assume the imps of the Dark Ages come from these creatures that wander around. They just have a higher exposure to the level of hell energy, and with this being the case, we can extrapolate that foundationally the denizens of hell were at one point likely humans as well. I mean, given Davos' form being one that is recognizably human, this is likely why he would want to create more of those in the first place. I mean, you relate to what you look like, right? So again though, take this part with a grain of salt, mainly because this is not confirmed canon as far as I can tell. But then again, most of my videos tread that line of, but is it really confirmed? No, it's really not, but it's all thought experiments and theory and politics. Anyways, so the hair being present could be a convergent evolutionary trait, but given the imp evolution and them appearing in the first place, I believe it's more in line with the ideology that these were mammals that were corrupted. And we'll see more examples of this thinking in later episodes when I discuss other creatures. But those are in the future, because right now, what is this progression? Well, this idea stems from the fact that some of the lore claims that the imps themselves are related to the Archviles. A breakdown of this is, again, predicated on the amount of hell energy exposure and successful lines. It would appear that you have two lines that diverge after the original denizens becomes an imp. Well, technically 3, because there were very clearly soldiers in Amora who were not corrupted and were still in their original form. Of course, it's a bit odd that they exist as such, whereas others have lost their brain's capacity to think, but it may have just been a proximity thing. Given the entire realm was corrupted and became incredibly sinister and chaotic, as well as just flat out evil, it was very clearly either like Urdak or the earthly realms at one point in time. And if you found yourself in more corrupted areas, your mind was lost to you, as well as is standard with hell bleeding over into any area. I mean, look at Earth, when they claimed over 60% of the planet was taken over at this point by super goreness. Any person caught in that would be subsequently corrupted, whereas those in other areas may have not been. Now, why is it that some of the hypothesized humans of Amora are still functional? That remains to be seen, as you would expect them to be corrupted, given that the Dark Lord is like right there. Anyhow, so this progression appears to take two pathways, which is the agile evolutionary pathway as it's suggested, or the summoner pathway. The agile evolutionary pathway leads to the larger imp in Doom Eternal, known as the Prowler, which then turns into a Hell Knight and then leads them to turning into the Baron of Hell. After a while, their true bipedalism returns to them in this process between the Prowler and the Hell Knight. The imp of Doom the Dark Ages, or the Imp Stalker, is the possibly mid-step as a result. I mean, its physical form from both the Prowler and the Hell Knight, like, it appears to be a mid-step, but what I do find interesting is this argument could be undone, as also based on the summoner pathway, it's very clear kind of what may be going on. The summoner pathway culminates into the Archvile, which again, there is some relation between the imp and the Archvile. So actually, given that this is a real-time thing and I'm recording this, what I believe is that the Imp Stalker, as known, actually shows likely the summoner pathway is the route that it is taken, and that the summoner does not evolve into the Archvile, but instead the Archvile is from a different line that evolves from the Imp Stalker. And to understand this concept, let's quickly talk about the summoner before heading into the morphology of the Stalker. The summoner, while bipedal, prefers to levitate. As a result of this, the legs are small and the feet have become completely secondary appendages that appear likely that they could not even hold up the weight of the creature at all. Whereas when we look at the Archvile, the dude is stout, his legs are plantigrade, and the bone growths clearly show the Imp Stalker turns into the Archvile. So, you know where we need to begin to kind of connect this thing up. Starting with the feet, we see the Imp Stalker also has a plantigrade structuring of its own foot. Now, it has 2 feet, its own feet. The toes sport large claw-like protrusions that have 2 claws on the front of the foot. The Archvile will have 3 toes by comparison and a 4th claw around the side of the foot. The foot structure between the two is exactly the same, otherwise being plantigrade. So as we move up the leg, we see the shin is covered in a thick leathery skin and the calves are quite muscular. On the knees exists a bony protrusion, allowing the creature to knee anything and very likely eviscerate them entirely. As we move up the leg, we will see, much like with the Archvile, a bony ridge has begun to form. It should also be noted that the Archvile has a similar bony protrusion on its knee. Moving up to the abdomen, this area has a thinner covering of skin and bro is absolute swole goals. While on the pelvic region, there's really nothing to indicate the sex of this creature. Prometheus here has a 10-pack, and much like the rest of his build, is insanely muscular. After playing this game, my testosterone levels increased by about 600 nanograms per deciliter. Also, I'm at the gym 3 times a day as of now. As we move up to the thoracic region, a secondary rib covering over the original rib cage is pretty standard, and the chest also sports massive pectoral muscles with more bony protrusions that jut out near where the clavicle bone would sit. In this area, several new muscles have formed, and the skin appears to be mostly absent or just covering the muscle only where it can. This indicates rapid growth took place in this area and new connective tissues needed to be formed. As we move up to the shoulders, this area, while not shoulder pauldrony like the Archvile, has these same bone growths coming out the sides of them. I think you kind of see with this thing, it's quite clearly just a few steps away from being the Archvile. The connection, morphologically speaking, is way too close for it to be coincidental, and it does show that the imp progression theory is correct. As we move down to the arms, Bro's swole goals again rivaling the Doomslayer in terms of bicep and tricep size. Around the back of his arms, on the elbows and forearms, we see more bony protrusions, and then as we head down into the forearms, they glow with hell energy corruption as the hands themselves are crazy telling as to what it continues into. The hands have 2 fingers and 1 thumb exactly like the Archvile, with claws several inches in length that can slice through flesh and metal extremely easily. Around the back of this creature, we see mostly the muscle appears to be bursting out of its skin, and in all cases, they appear to be the same areas as with, again, the Archvile. So as we move up to the head of this creature, we see the imp eyes are still mostly maintained in appearance, with the mouth Giga Chad large and with teeth about 1 inch in length. Internal to it, hell energy glows within its mouth, and as we look to the head, however, we can see it is a mid-step as the brain area does not appear as large as with the Archvile, and specifically the parietal locations of its brain. And this would probably appear to indicate that the Archvile is likely more autonomous than the Imp Stalker, and the Imp Stalker is also going to be less rare than the Archvile, and is in general considered to be a heavy and not just fodder in confrontations with humans. It is incredibly lethal, concerning itself as a demon. However, to the Doomslayer, literally everything is fodder. So the Imp Stalker typically has a few modes of attack in which it can engage with the Night Sentinels and the Doomslayer. Interestingly, having not seen any of them in Doom Eternal, this would seem to indicate that the Doomslayer took out so many that they are now incredibly rare. That are the ones that were left turned into the Archviles through more exposure to hell energy because they had to change. Like basically the Doomslayer destroying hell took every demon that was there and forced them to change into something else, whether they be more agile or larger or strong, just in some way to try to contend with the Doomslayer. Either way, utilizing these claws that can easily slice through the armor of a Night Sentinel, and if you're caught without any armor, the hell energy released by this creature can easily blast apart a person with very little effort. However, you are not a Night Sentinel. You are a good old-fashioned human imbued with the powers of a god, and as a result of that, these can be deflected straight back into the face of the Imp Stalker, exploding it in the process, or at least severely damaging it. At this point, you can either completely blow it apart with your shield, cut its head off, or just in general, make sure it never has a chance to continue up its own progression ladder to become the Archvile. Ultimately, these creatures, again, they show the evolutionary pathway is clearly there, meaning that essentially I'm beginning to have to shift my thinking towards, while there are different types of species that were clearly within this realm, like the Pinkies are their own species, the Cacao Demons, their own species, the Unwilling essentially become the Imps. Those were the probably largest population that were then corrupted, which means if Earth had been completely taken over, then humans would have very likely followed a very similar pathway and then progressed and changed concerning their own genetics. But anyhow, what do you guys think of this theory? It's been a hot minute since we covered Doom anything on this channel, so I'm excited to be doing it once again. Until then, though, and we move into these other episodes, I want to thank you guys for watching. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Roanoke Games link, where I live stream in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astronaut, Bananas are epic. Thank you, my man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Desk Dancer. Thank you as well. And I'd like to thank our scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo Metric System, Ocean Gate was a cover-up for an anglerfish attack, Official Texan, and Stutz. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate your support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out, so thank you. But all right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.